Well, as you know, it's been a rather bitter, cold week up here in the northern part of the country. So I'm just trying to think of something interesting to talk about for this weekend. So, what do we talk about today? Whoa! Hey, what the? Well, okay then. I guess today we're gonna go retro and talk about what is actually really cool about retro and what it means to me and what it might mean for you too. So stick around. You never know what's going to happen around here. Okay, so what exactly is retro? To kind of put it in a nutshell, retro is basically something that was around prior that you still think is really cool. For a lot of gamers, it depends on what game system that you remember from when you were a child or before, that maybe your parents introduced you to before you were around, that you came across and you thought was actually really cool. So depending on how old you are, it could be a PS1, it could be a Super Nintendo, it could be a regular Nintendo, or it could be something even before. Well, when I think of retro, one of the systems that comes to mind to me is one of these. This is Atari 2600, the VCS version. And I actually recently picked up a couple of these because I want to get back into playing a lot of the games that I played when I was a kid, like Missile Command, or one of the other ones I played a lot of was Kaboom, and I also played Pitfall. Of course, everybody played Pitfall. Pitfall was like one of those really high ranking games that everybody remembers when they think of Atari. They always think of Pitfall. And I love Pitfall. I also love the sequel to it, Pitfall 2 Lost Caverns, which if you've never had a chance to play Pitfall 2, you really got to play it because it's like Pitfall, but it's not, because it's not the same format entirely. In Pitfall 2, you actually have some goals that you have to get to, and the whole overall board design is a lot bigger, both horizontally as well as vertically. There are a lot of vertical stages that you go through in Pitfall 2. Another game I really got into back in those days was Space Invaders. Now, Space Invaders came out in about 1978 by Taito Corporation, and what was interesting about it is that it gave people something to do that they hadn't seen before. And people had grown up with science fiction and aliens coming down and attacking the Earth. Well, Space Invaders was kind of like, to me, it was kind of like the embodiment of that, where you were up to, defending the planet against the invaders. And one thing I found out funny about Space Invaders is that one of the things I didn't realize before is that there was a real technical reason why the invaders got faster as there were fewer of them on the screen. It wasn't really anything to do with the programming. It had to do with the amount of memory that needed to be used to draw all the invaders on the screen. So it took a lot more memory to draw all the invaders, so as that number got smaller, the invaders got faster. Just a little quick tidbit there for you. So I played Atari for quite a while, and then after a while, some of the newer systems came out. Of course, some people gravitated to the Intellivision, and I thought about it, but then after I saw the controller, I was like, ugh, this controller is horrible. It looks like kind of like an early prototype for a cell phone. It had a number pad on the top, and then at the bottom you had this disc controller. It wasn't even a joystick. With the Atari, you had a joystick. You had the solid joystick with the stick and the button. With the Intellivision, you didn't have that. You had this flimsy disc thing on the bottom, and then you had the fire buttons on the side, and to me, it was a horrible way of controlling a game. However, when Coleco came out, the ColecoVision, right around about the same time thereabouts, it was so much better. Yeah, it had the number pad on it, but it had a real joystick. Oh my goodness. It had a joystick, 2 fire buttons, and you could play really cool games on it. You could play Zaxxon, which was a lot closer to the arcade version than the Atari was. If you've ever played the Atari version of Zaxxon, it is horrible. It is horrendous in my opinion. You got to play Donkey Kong, which is really close to the arcade game again. You also got to play games like, Venture, Pepper 2, which was one of my personal favorites because that was a game that, it didn't have a whole lot of variety to it, but you did have goals in it. And also another one was Cosmic Adventure. Cosmic Adventure was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. So after a while, of course, we went through the video game crash of the 80s thanks to the over-influx of really crappy games for the Atari, which kind of drove down consumer confidence in video games in general. And that lasted up until about the time that this thing came out, the original Nintendo Entertainment System. And this was actually the model that I had back in the 80s. Not this exact one, of course, but this model, the front loader. And that system I played for like a long time. I played all the Mario games. I played Zelda 2. Why did I ever play Zelda 2? Oh. Sorry guys, did not like Zelda 2. In fact, Zelda 2 pretty much shot my faith in the entire Zelda franchise until the Super Nintendo came out with Link to the Past. Then it redeemed itself in a huge way. Oh my goodness, Super Nintendo came out, man, I thought the world was going to go nuts. This system was intense. It has so many cool games out for it. You had, of course, you had the Mario and the Zelda games, but you had a lot more others. You had Super Metroid. You started having the Mario Kart series. You had the F-Zero series that came out, and then of course, Castlevania eventually came up to the Super Nintendo also. And Castlevania started off on the Nintendo, which was another really good title that made that system really super popular to this day. So, and then right about the same time, the Sega, can't even talk right. About the same time the Super Nintendo came out, of course, the Sega Genesis came out. And the Sega Genesis to this day is still one of my all-time favorite systems. Mainly for games such as Mortal Kombat, the first one, because of course you had the blood code. But there was another game that you played, and I don't know how many people remember this game, but there was a game called Starflight. Starflight was one of those rare games that came out, and what was cool about it is that back in those days, most of the instruction manuals that came out for Sega Genesis games were really super thin. No, not Starflight. No. These guys went out of their way to make sure you had all the information. The instruction manual was about that thick. I mean, it was huge. The cartridge was huge because I think it had a battery in it to back up, and then you had a map that showed you, basically the whole galaxy where you went to, and it helped you go where you needed to. If you could find this game complete with the manual and the map, by all means definitely pick it up, because believe me, emulation does not do this game justice. You've got to have the manual and the map in order to be able to really get into what it is that you're playing with this game. So what other systems were out back in the day? Oh, of course you had the TurboGrafx, which brought you Bonk's Adventure, Keith Courage and Alpha Zones, and a bunch of others. That one didn't quite take off as well as a lot of people, would have hoped, because for one, it just didn't catch on. And then after a while, you started getting into the other systems. You got into the Saturn from Sega, after the Sega CD, of course, because you had the Sega Genesis, you had the Sega CD, and then you had the 32X. And by the time you had all of that put together, I'm not quite sure you really understood what system you really had. But I will say this much. The first one, the Model 1 Genesis, the one that kind of looked like a tank turret, that one was way better than the Model 2. Aesthetically, at least. And you pair that up with the Model 1 Sega CD, that system looked gorgeous on your shelf. It was great. And it brought out a lot better graphics, for what was available at the time. And then after the Sega CD, like I said, of course, you went to the Sega Saturn. And then after the Super NES, you had the Nintendo 64. And then PlayStation came out. And PlayStation pretty much changed the whole map of things. And it's just kind of progressed on from there. But when you think about, grassroots, back to the beginning, going back to what was retro, okay? When you think of the retro scene overall, what do you think of? You think of the movies that were around in the day. You think of the music that was back in the day. Yes, I think the music back in the day was a lot better than a lot of the stuff that they have out now that's auto-tuned to death. Seriously, I mean, come on. Give us some real talent behind the music nowadays. It's getting increasingly rare, but that's a rant for a whole nother video. But when I think about what retro means to me, I think of those old games. I think of Space Invaders. I think of Pac-Man. Even though I don't think of Pac-Man on the Atari, because believe me, Pac-Man on the Atari was atrocious. It was a shell. It was a shell of what it could have been. But of course, you have to realize that the Atari back in the day didn't have a whole lot of memory, so of course they couldn't replicate the arcade experience exactly like we were hoping it would. I mean, come on, Space Invaders looked a lot better than that. I mean, look at this guy. This guy looks a lot better than the Atari version of Pac-Man did. Hey, guy. But nowadays, more people want, just what's graphically pleasing, and they think pretty graphics are better than, basic gameplay. So they just kind of, get rid of stuff like that, and then they just kind of go off on, what's pretty, what's graphics, give me that super smooth, buttery, 60 frames per second, ultra realistic stuff. And and this is kind of a slippery slope when you get into that gradient there, where you're concentrating more on prettiness than you do about gameplay. And some people get it right. Some studios do get it right. So don't get me wrong. Modern gaming has come quite a ways. Didn't used to always be that way. Even now you still have a few duds out there. Heaven knows you have a few duds out there. Maybe more than a few. But it seems like, to me, when it comes to the reason why I go back to a lot of the older games is because they had a lot of limitations to work with. They didn't really have this huge millions and millions of dollars budget to blow on graphics. Well, of course, back then you didn't really have the technical capabilities to do what they can do nowadays. And even before Space Invaders, you had games like Pong. And I know you're thinking, Pong, that is such a basic game, but at one time Pong actually used to be an arcade game. If you can believe that, Pong was an arcade game. I actually saw one in the town I grew up in. It was in a bar. Yeah, went down there with my parents. So don't judge me on this. But anyway, Pong was still a good game. It was a competitive game. It was basically one of your first local competitive, two-player games out there. And it just kind of evolved from there. And I know there's a lot of stuff that happened before then. Before then, you had Computer Space, and you had the brown box that came out for Magnavox. A lot of really, primitive by today's standards concepts, but they were really groundbreaking back in the day. And when you look at how things have progressed from the 70s since then, so we're talking in the last 40 or so years, how we've gone from simplistic stuff like Pong and Space Invaders to this earth-shattering stuff like they have out now with The Last of Us and The Last Guardian and Grand Theft Auto and all these really high-end games. You look at that space of time and you look at how far things have come. And it's a really good thing because, gaming has done a lot for people. It's brought people together. It's, brought a spirit of competitiveness and some cooperation also. It's done a lot. So I like to think back and be thankful for where the roots of everything all came from. It all came back from real basic pixels and limited animation and it's blossomed to what it is now. So what do you guys think when you think of retro? Do you think of the old games? Do you think of the older music? Do you think of anything else that was out at the time? I think a lot of the earlier technology that was out at the time. Heaven knows I still have some of it. I still have a VCR, for crying out loud, because I have a lot of videotapes.
Yes. I collected it back from when I was younger.
I haven't gotten rid of it. I know, I have a computer. I could probably transfer it all, but that takes time to do. Well, heck, I have nothing but time. So anyway, let me know what you think about retro. What are your thoughts about it? Drop them down in the comments down below. I'd love to discuss it with you. Do you still go out and collect old systems like the Atari? Do you still play games on these older systems? And granted, I am one for playing the games on the original hardware whenever possible. Granted, some of it's stupidly expensive now, but if at all possible. I do, because I play stuff on the Genesis, I play stuff on the Super Nintendo, for crying out loud, and I still enjoy it. So that's my take on it. If you like what I've been blabbering about for the last little while, go and smack that thumbs up button and let me know what you think. If you didn't like it, go ahead and give it a thumbs down. All feedback is relevant. But please leave comments down below, see what you think. And if you want to see some more random stuff, go and smack that subscribe button down there. It's a big red button. Can't miss it. So until next time, I'm just going to say, go out there, be random, go out there and enjoy your gaming and think about where things have come from. And be thankful that things did come from back then. So, because otherwise you probably wouldn't have this really cool stuff that you have today. So be nostalgic a little bit. Go out and enjoy it. So have fun. Stay warm, especially if you're up in the northern areas. For crying out loud, stay warm. So take care now.